All right. We'd like to welcome you all out this evening to the public hearing in Layton of the Utah Independent Redistricting Commission. We are very appreciative of your attendance tonight. As we start, we have three mayors with us, two of them in person and one of them online. And we'd like to first invite Mayor Petro to say a few words, and then Mayor Witt, and then Mayor Bolos will follow the two of you. So, Mayor Petro.
Well, thank you very much, and I honestly want to welcome everyone here to Layton City. We appreciate you spending your Friday night in our great city, and not only that, within your council chambers here. And you know, I'm a proponent of this is a public building, so we welcome anyone publicly, and glad that we're able to go through this process as far as redistricting, and certainly involve the residents throughout not only this city or our county, but the state. And I think it's admirable that we have this much participation, and I hope that you folks feel very comfortable speaking tonight, which I know Chairman Fisher will conduct that meeting. But as far as I'm concerned, and I'll just speak quickly as far as Layton City, I mean, we certainly have embraced this districting process, and I know that you're interested in our views and how we see it, but I have to say that, and I think I can speak on behalf of most of the council. In fact, I have Council Member Don Fitzpatrick with me as well tonight. But I think a lot of us feel like we're going to trust the system. We're going to trust that those that are chairing both committees here are going to come up with the right decision as far as losing any ground or gaining any ground within our city. I can see the advantages right now based upon those that are certainly holding those offices. But we do know that when election time comes around and that changes, that shifts the deck again. So that's why we're here to just say you have our support to come up with what you feel is the right areas to represent the residents as a whole. So again, welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here, and I want to express my thanks and gratitude for all those that have put in a tremendous amount of time to get to this point. And I know that this year it was on a fast pace. So again, thank you very much.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Witt.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to address you. Really appreciate the time and effort that you all have put into this. And from the Kaysville's perspective, we have been happy with our representatives, and I just say that whenever possible, have as few cuts through communities as possible. My dad was a scoutmaster and said, when you have one scout, you have one scout. When you have two scouts, you have half a scout. When you have three scouts, you have no scouts at all. And I would say the same is true for representatives. So everybody thinks somebody else is taking care of you. So, but Kaysville, we feel like we have been well represented. I will say that Clearfield currently is divided up amongst 4 state legislators, and not one of them is from Clearfield, and they are the 3rd largest city in Davis County. You're welcome, Mark Shepard, for making that mention. So anyway, but we have been happy with the division of Kaysville. I-15 seems to be a really good location, and appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mayor Bolos.
Oh, I think I'm unmuted. Okay, thank you. I just want to say I appreciate the commission for the work that you're doing, and I want to echo the sentiments that have just been shared about multiple representatives. I have a great relationship with all 3 of our representatives here in West Haven, but I know that one of them only represents a small portion of our city, and we've experienced a lot of rapid growth here. And so I think that I agree with the ask that you look at keeping communities more centralized into, and I don't even mind having 2 representatives, but it's a little difficult when you have 3 to feel like to feel like you're getting that one-on-one representation. So again, thank you for your work. I appreciate that. And I know things will change here in West Haven just because of our growth over the last several years. So I appreciate the efforts made in making that fair and equal.
And really appreciate having the three mayors joining us this evening. We are also very grateful for the members of the public that are with us who could have had other things to do on a Friday night, and we really appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us. What I'd like to do now is to give you kind of an overview of the redistricting process and the role of the Independent Commission and how we fit in the overall process and how we connect with the legislatures at work. So in 2018, the voters approved Proposition 4, which created the Independent Redistricting Commission. The commission was then refined through a legislative compromise in 2000 with Senate Bill 200. And as a result, we have a 7-member commission. 3 of the members of the commission were appointed by the Republican leadership in the state legislature. 2 of those have a partisan appointment, that's Commissioner Bishop and Commissioner Hilliard. And one of them is an independent, and that's Commissioner Baker. We have 3 that were appointed by the Democratic leadership in the legislature. Again, 2 of them have a partisan appointment, and that's Commissioner Durham and Commissioner Hale. And Commissioner Thorne is the independent appointed by the Democrats. And then I was appointed by the governor to serve as chair. Our charge is to produce a set of district maps for Congress, the state Senate, the state House, and the state school board. Our goal is to produce a set of good maps that will help the legislature choose a set of maps that will be productive in representing the state as they go through their process. We were appointed back in early February, and we started meeting shortly after that as we organized the commission. We were a new entity, and so we had to go through the groundwork of getting an executive director, figuring out how to operate, all of those kinds of details that most organizations take for granted. Normally, in April, we would have received data from the Census Bureau that would have allowed us to start drawing maps as early as late April. But because of the pandemic, among other things, we didn't receive data from the Census Bureau until August 12th. It then took about a week and a half or so for us to get the data into our mapping software. And so since late August, we've been spending several days a week mapping. And the way we've done it is we've divided up into 3 mapping teams. And so on this side, I was going to say on my left, but I don't want to make Commissioner Hilliard feel awkward being on the left. But we have a mapping team that was Commissioner Thorne and Commissioner Hilliard, and they represent what we've done on each of the mapping teams, and that is to make sure we have a Democratic appointee and a Republican appointee to make sure that we have a cooperative spirit among the commission. We then had a mapping team with Commissioner Durham, Commissioner Bishop, and Commissioner Baker. And then Commissioner Hale and I were the 3rd mapping team. And you can watch our mapping live on YouTube. We have identified our mapping teams by colors. There's nothing special about the colors green, orange, and purple, other than they aren't red and blue, which was a conscious choice on our part to not show any kind of particular affinity. But these mapping teams have been spending, in some cases, hundreds of hours going through our 4 sets of maps and drawing multiple drafts. And all of those drafts have been put up on our website. The goal being to be as transparent as we possibly can. And we want people to be able to see the decision making that we've been going through. And so it's one of the very rewarding things that I've been able to watch is the positive way in which the commission has worked together and the way they've taken public comments very seriously. So we get public comments in a variety of ways through the public hearings, such as we will tonight. We get them through comments on our website. Some are specifically attached to specific maps. We get comments just sent in through our email address as well. And the commission takes those comments seriously. And so often what happens is on a Monday after a set of public hearings, we'll come in and we'll start talking about, well, here's what they said was wrong with our map. Can we fix that? And we can try. And sometimes we can figure out a way to move those puzzle pieces around, and other times we can't. But we give it an honest effort in trying to take into account the comments that we're receiving from the public. Now, in drawing our maps, we have a set of criteria that are laid out statutorily. The first criteria is one that drives redistricting everywhere, and that is equal population. And so each district needs to have essentially an equal population. For congressional districts, that's 817,904. And you'll note that there are lots of counties across our state that are much smaller than 804,000 people. And so as a result, we have to find ways of combining cities and counties together to make a district that equals that number. The way we combine people for districting purposes is through the census's data layers, using the smallest unit, that is the block. And so the block level, it can have census blocks that have 0 population. We have lots of those, for example, out in the West Desert or up in the mountains. Or it could have 50 or 100 or several hundred people in a given census block. And we can't split census blocks. And so if we're looking to find an additional 200 people to bring into a community, into a district, we have to use the blocks that are available to do that. And we have a whole nother set of criteria that say we can't just pick and choose from wherever to bring those in. We have to bring them in a way that's contiguous. That's our next criteria. But let me give you the population targets for the other districts. So in the state Senate, our population target is 112,814. For the state House, it's 43,622. And for the state school board, it's 218,108. Now, we can have some deviation from that ideal number, but on the congressional maps, we really have had a sense that we want that number to be as close to 0 as possible. And that's a little more feasible in some ways on the congressional maps than it is, say, on the state school board map, if it is that we're trying to keep school districts whole, for example. So again, we want our districts to be contiguous. That's another requirement. So they have to be touching. And we don't want them touching just at the corner points, like we do at the 4 corners. That wouldn't work. It has to be a real meaningful connection between these census blocks. And then our districts are charged to be reasonably compact. And so that's relatively easy here along the Wasatch Front, where our communities are relatively small. Small geographically, I should say, because they're not small population-wise. We've seen dramatic growth, especially along the Wasatch Front. But in being reasonably compact, it's not just small, but we also want to avoid odd shapes that can't be explained by other criteria. And so one of the criteria that we have is keeping cities and counties whole. And cities in particular often have odd-shaped boundaries. And so when you look at some of our maps, you may go, gosh, they've got some really weird lines here. Well, if you dive down into it, you'll often find that those strange shapes on the map are due to us following the boundaries of a municipality, trying to keep a municipality whole in many cases. One of the other criteria that we have is communities of interest. Now, communities of interest is an interesting criteria, in part because it's relatively new in the world of redistricting. There were a few states that tried to use it in the 2010 redistricting process, but it's new to us here in Utah. And a community of interest, there is not a definition that allows us to easily, quantifiably determine the boundaries of communities. And so what we've been doing is we've been asking the people across the state to tell us what their communities are. So that could be a neighborhood, that could be an ethnic community, it could be an economic community. I know if, for example, when Commissioner Hale and I were looking at Ogden and trying to figure out where to split Ogden for a House district, because there are more people than can fit in one district, one of the things we were looking at was the economic activity in the community and trying not to split that up in unreasonable sorts of ways. And so, but we don't know those communities. And so we've had to rely on people across the state to help us get to know those communities. We've gotten over 1,000 submissions of communities of interest, people drawing simple maps and then telling us about those communities. And we have that information available to us as we draw our maps. But the one thing that can't be a community of interest is a political party, an incumbent, or a political candidate. So it can't be the fan of some party or candidate. But any of these other kinds of self-identified communities, we're willing to entertain. And what we've done is we've taken all those communities, as I mentioned, we've looked at them on the map, and we've divided them into about 9 different categories, ranging from economic to environmental to neighborhoods, among other criteria. And those are all available on our website for people to see. One of the other criteria that we use is geographic boundaries, meaning when it makes sense, we should use a natural geographic feature, such as a river or the mountains, or a man-made geographic feature, such as I-15. When we were down in Provo, for example, at least one of the people made a comment that said that I-15 is like a mountain range in Provo. You're on one side or you're on the other, and the two don't meet very often. And so we know that in some cases, places like I-15 do that to communities, and that may make, if we have to divide a community, using something like that may make sense. But again, we need your feedback to know whether that makes sense in your communities. We also have the criteria of keeping records of prior districts. So our standard says, to the extent practicable, preserve records of prior districts. Now, one of the challenges that we have in doing that is that, and it was mentioned, that we've seen dramatic shifts in the patterns of growth over the last 10 years. So, for example, we've seen in northwest Utah County, in Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, for example, they've grown much faster than other parts of the state. And so, as a portion of the population, what's happened is the population has shifted out that way, which means that there's going to have to be more representation that shifts out that way. We've also seen that down in southern Utah. We even see that within counties. It was mentioned, places like West Haven have seen faster growth in some of the other surrounding communities. And so that then shifts the patterns. And so we can't simply use the lines that were drawn last time, because that won't allow us to be at those equal population figures. We've also been challenged to have boundary agreement, which sometimes is called nesting, so that you have districts that stack on top of each other neatly. The problem in Utah in doing that is we have 75 House seats, 29 Senate seats, 15 school district seats, and 4 congressional seats. Those don't all divide into each other nice and evenly. And so there isn't an easy way to stack those. And the other thing the one place where you go, oh, maybe you could stack the school districts and the House districts. Well, the challenge in doing that is the school district lines don't always match up with county lines. You have an Ogden school district as well as a Weber County school district, for example. And so that makes that process of stacking them on top of each other even more challenging. But where we can, we want to try and keep those lines together. And we have Commissioner Baker, who reminds us of this. He's a GIS expert by training, works for Davis County. And he has reminded us many times that we want to try and keep the lines together as much as we possibly can, to keep the work for local officials to be as straightforward as possible so that it's manageable. The other criteria that we have is, and I'll read it. The commission will, to the extent practicable, prohibit the purposeful or undue favoring or disfavoring of an incumbent elected official, a candidate or prospective candidate for elected office, or a political party. And so the commission has decided to not use political data. So we aren't using voting data. We're not using data on where the incumbents live. And that was a decision for us to try and minimize the likelihood that we were going to favor or disfavor an incumbent, a candidate, a potential candidate, or a political party. We'll talk some later tonight on some of the strategies that we have for evaluating how well we've been doing on these criteria. But that gives you a broad picture of the set of criteria that we're trying to balance. And it's not always possible to do all of them at once. And one of the things that we know is if I try and minimize the splits of cities, then I might, that might cause me to have a little more unequal population. And we have to make judgments on whether or not that's reasonable or whether that's not reasonable. And for different maps and different kinds of offices, we may feel differently about how that plays out. Is there anything else that any member of the commission would like to add on the process picture? Okay, they're telling me that I got it all. So yeah, but I'm sure they will reserve the right to add something later if it comes to them, and we will give them that privilege. We would now like to ask Soraya Mori, one of our staff, to come and talk a little bit about how the public can be engaged in addition to being here at the public hearing and speaking to us in the open comment section. So Soraya.
Okay, thank you. So probably the most useful way that you can help us right now as we're winding down is go to our website, and we have flyers and things with the website on it, but it's UIRC.Utah.Gov.
Sorry, could I just ask, can people see the screen with the lights on it? Good. I don't know whether we can.
Better if they were off.
We'll see if we can manage that.
Wrong one,
I
screen.
think it's all back there.
Okay. That's probably better.
A little better. And so I'll just give you a brief overview, and you can go, like, you can talk to us after, and we can go over it with you if you want to look at it, or you can do it on your own. But
Speak a little closer to the microphone, please.
sorry. So you'll see that there are drafted district maps. And so these are the maps that the commissioners have been working on. And you can click on each, like Congressional, and it'll pull up the ones that are currently just in the running for the finalized maps. And then you'll have an opportunity to look at the boundaries that have been drawn and see how different teams have thought of doing it. And as these are draft maps, they're meant to be changed. And on the left, you'll see there's a box where you can put in some information about yourself and rate the map and give us information on why it's a good map or why it's a bad map. And as much detail you can give us, the better. And the cool thing about this software is you're able to zoom in to your neighborhood, your city. You can see your house. So you can see exactly where the boundaries affect you, your neighborhood, your community. And as Chair Facer said, you know your community better than we do. So this is how you can be helpful to us, letting us know where we may split. Yeah, do you have a question?
I just wondered, is there a place to see how the map exists today?
Like what the current districts are. So we've actually gotten some feedback about doing that. I have uploaded it on the Congressional section, and I'm working on adding it on the rest of the 3 maps. And so you'll see that by the end of the night. So you can compare what the current districts to the drafted maps. So that's a really easy way. There are other ways that you can participate. Like if you didn't want to play around with the software, you can send us a comment, you can send us an email, and other ways that you can can help out is if you go to participate, you can draw an area, like just a square or like a shape around your community. So it'll pull up this other software and it'll give you information, like you'll be able to watch a video and it'll give you some instructions. But again, you can zoom into your neighborhood and draw a shape around it and then let us know why that is a community of interest. So it just helps us know what is important to people as we consider editing and drafting these maps. So yeah, these are the ways that you can participate. If you been coming, to the public hearing, that's really helpful to us as well, and leaving your comments. So you can send an email, or you can, there's a form as well where you can let us know your thoughts and reach out to us. We're happy to help answer any questions that you have. We just thrilled that people are as interested in this as we are. Any questions? Yeah.
So your process, you can just focus on your area and don't have to submit a map with everything.
Exactly. And I mean, because on the website, we have an area where you can play around with the software and draw a whole map if you want. Some people have wanted to do that, but that's pretty daunting. And so, yeah, this way, these two ways, doing your community of interest and looking at the draft maps and commenting on them, just a much simpler way. And then you can say, I know this area, I can comment on that and give feedback.
My question is, how does the work that this committee is doing mesh with the legislative committee?
That's something that Bryce can answer much better than I can.
And thank you for asking, because I forgot to say that piece of the puzzle. What we're going to do is we're going to devise a set of 12 maps, as I mentioned. We will be submitting those to the legislature and making a presentation to them on November 1st. They're then, under the statute, given the instructions to evaluate our maps, and they then have to decide whether they want to use our maps or if they want to go on their own. Now, our hope is that because of the work that the commission is doing and because the legislature appointed the members of the commission, that our good maps will foster discussion and lead to better outcomes and better maps for the state. Please, Commissioner Durham.
I would just respond to one part of your question, which is how does our process mesh with that of the legislature? And aside from the results that Commissioner Fazer just described, it has not meshed at all. They develop their own criteria, their own standards, they're using their own staff, their own data, and they are drawing their own maps. Whereas we have done the same thing on our side, developing our criteria, using our staff, and doing the drawing. That was the way the legislature wanted it set up, so that's how we worked.
And they will vote on it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Please, Commissioner Hilliard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd add this to it as well. Under the Utah Constitution, the obligation and responsibility for redistricting is given clearly to the legislature. So they make the decision. Our role is to come up with recommendations and explanations as to why we think that the boundaries that we will recommend are the ones the legislature should adopt. And they have to take some action on them, look at them, and make some comment on them. They can't just flat out ignore them, but they have the ultimate responsibility under the Constitution to make that decision. Now, one thing I noticed as I checked it out, I think this is true. I know we have spent a lot of time drafting maps, and when you look at this, you'll see a lot of proposals. None of them are final. We've not voted on any of them. Commissioner Thorne and I have spent many days working over these maps and making recommendations and doing it. And when we have a meeting like this, we will meet again and say, now what did we learn from Layton? As we look at this, what are some of the things in our maps that ought to be changed based on what we heard from Davis County here in Layton? I understand the legislative committee has not submitted any maps. So they are just taking public input. And I think their reasoning is we want to hear from the people first before we start drafting the maps. Two different approaches. I would say one's right and the other's wrong, but I like the fact that when you come to these meetings, if you haven't looked you can look up and say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Why they ever do that? Or you can say, that's a pretty good idea. But you need to understand the real difficulty in this is trying to get these numbers equal. And I'll just give you this example. Commissioner Thorne and I tried to do one mapping starting in Utah County. We soon learned that you have to start on the outside and come in. Because, for example, Rich County in Bear Lake, you have to go either south or west. And so if you don't do it that way, you end up in Rich County and you're short 50,000 people, where do you find it? And so we've tried, like a puzzle, to be outside together. But if we do that, if you take Rich, Cache, and Box Elder and come south towards Davis County, the question is, you get into Weber County, and from my experience, I would probably say that the boundary between Weber and Davis County are quite similar. I don't think you've got really a difference. Obviously, Hillfield is a major player, Weber State. Those are things that are very common in these two counties. But now the question gets, when you get down here, you don't have enough to complete all your areas. So where do you get additional areas to add to that? Well, in the past, they've taken Tooele County and moved Tooele County up into Box Elder County to make that kind of there. I'm on past where they've gone in Rich County, they've gone south into Summit County, and even Morgan, and brought that up to get the numbers right. But do we really want, now if we come in here, to say to Davis County, we're short, now we're going to Salt Lake County. We're going to move Salt Lake County into areas of Davis County to make our districts, because the numbers are so important. And that's what I'd like to hear, is a question, and I could argue that North Salt Lake and the Avenue areas have a lot in common. There's a lot of well-to-do people, a lot of business people who actually do business in Salt Lake. Maybe they are more alike than maybe North Salt Lake is with, say, Clearfield. I don't know. And that's what we need to hear from people as we're doing these maps. The city map, the state house maps are smaller with only 43,000 plus. And so they're a little bit easier. In the congressional maps, we have some people say we got to have rural and urban together. Some say, no, we got to have the urban alone. It's very simple. You can do one congressional map out of Weber and Davis County and plus a little bit of Salt Lake. Salt Lake's 1.1 million, so they've got to have two. They can't have one congressional district. If that were the decision to put one completely in Salt Lake, part in the other, then they'd have to take Utah County up in there. You could end up pretty well with three districts. Then you'd have the fourth one going from Grouse Creek. I don't know how many people here know where Grouse Creek is, to Manila, to Blanding, to St. George, and then back up to Grouse Creek again. And you'd put together a map that is probably, you'd make almost an impossible position for one legislator to be able to service all that. And they're not all the same. If you go to Snowville and look at their, and you go to Vernal and look at theirs, they're really quite different in the world. So that's kind of the issues that we have to discuss and decide what we're going to do in making our recommendations. Because as Commissioner Pacer said, you know far more about what is the ties in Davis County than we do. We could just, yes, from experience, but you know from being on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I just had a question about, you said that there was a bill, we voted on the bill that you created,
Yes.
and then you commented that it's the Senate's responsibility. So how do those tie in together?
So that was part of the legislative compromise that happened in 2020, was a compromise with the legislature making it clear that they would be making the final decision and we would be making a recommendation to the legislature. So that was part of the compromise.
We voted that you guys get to choose, and the Senate said, no, we get to choose. I'm trying to understand.
Not quite that way. I mean, the courts were going to be involved. It was a bit more complicated. Mr. Bishop,
Right.
please.
The initiative that passed to have a commission, unfortunately, it's not legal. The Constitution says the legislature has to do it. So the bill that came out of the legislature said the commission would be established to give recommendations to the legislature. The legislature still has to do the final decision as to what the boundaries will be.
Thank you. We'd like to have our executive director give us a little bit of guidance on the public comment portion. So, Gordon?
It's great to have all of you here. We sure appreciate your comments, and I know the commission will
Gordon?
go back.
You might want to be.
Sorry, thank
Yep.
you. I know the commission will go back and take the things they hear tonight and be evaluating their maps. So it's critical the things they hear tonight. What we'd like to do is ask you to take about 5 minutes per person. There's not a timer, but just to kind of keep things moving. And the commission will engage you and make sure they understand your comments well. And also at the end, we'll have an open house where you can sit down with our staff, go through the website and software and just really understand how you could, like I said, draw maps of the whole state or just communities of interest or get feedback on the existing maps that are there. So we again appreciate you being here.
So we'd like to welcome anybody that would like to offer public comments to come up to the microphone and share their perspective with the commission. And as Mr. Haight indicated, there may even be some questions that come from the commission to make sure we're understanding the issues that you're raising.
One of the things to remember is that all the comments that you make, whether it's live today or it's online, will be recorded and reviewed by the commission, but it will also be part of our report that we make to the legislature. So none of your comments are going to disappear into the ozone someplace. It'll all be preserved because your views are important to what we do.
Thank you. Please.
Got a handout. So pass those out to everybody. One for staff, I was told. Really reluctant to come here, but I have a really huge, big conflict of interest I have to admit to you before I even start. I passed out to you the House District, existing House District 13 area, of which I have been campaigning for since 2018, 2020. And if I don't get taken out of the Clearfield area in 2022, I also campaigned in Cordova's District 14 in 2004 before the Clearfield segment here of CIA 10 and 11 were then transferred from Clearfield and Layton to this whole new area. My name is Tab Nuno. I have been through every house here for 7 times since the March of 2018. I feel pretty comfortable that I know this legislative District 13 very well. I've talked to thousands of residents since that time. I have now completed my 8th visit to half of the legislative district as of today. Several comments. I'm struck by the structure of District 13 because it excludes Clinton, the northwest portion of Clinton as a city. And I'm also struck by the fact that West Point was also the western portion of West Point, which is identified by WP.
Excuse me, Mr.
Yes.
Ernest, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you say you're concerned about the lines in the district, is this the 20?
These are the old ones.
The old ones,
So the
okay.
question is whether the new ones will, and I avoided deliberately looking at them because I really didn't want to get involved, but
Okay,
the
good, thank you.
newspaper article yesterday is like, oh, should it come, should I not?
So you're
come?
critiquing the
Yes,
old map.
the existing one.
Great, thank you.
So hopefully, I would suggest that we're trying to allow cities to be represented, that the western portion, northwest portion of Clinton, as well as the western portion of West Point be included in legislative District 13. And also with the strange Syracuse 15 on the very bottom of the map here, this is Syracuse 13. It's part of legislative District 13 for some reason. And you'll note that on the west part of besides Syracuse 15, there is going to be a fairly large development in that area, which will help kind of generate the consistent population if you took and put Syracuse 15 back into the other legislative district. So the big question I have now, and I'm really torn because I do live in CF 11, which I assume if you want to make Clearfield contiguous to having one legislative district, I would say that even if you combine Clearfield and Sunset, you'd end up with about minus 6,000 residents that you still have to find from some other area, which would have to be taken from Syracuse or Layton, and I don't know how they would feel about that area taken out. And you have, what do you call it? Clearfield, Freeport Center in that area also, which is kind of makes it a natural boundary. So all I can say is I would, have you consider keeping things as much the same as possible. Exclude again Syracuse 15 because it's kind of I don't know what's in there. It looks odd. And then let Clemson and West Point have their representation of one state representative. And if you could figure out how to do Clearfield with only, what was it, 31,000 to get to 43,000, including Sunset with 5,000, you still 6,000 left. I don't know how you do it. So, but I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm going to go home, and I also found out that I was going to run outside my legislative district, but I was informed tonight that that's illegal for Utah House races. So I'm going to be really depressed because I'm assuming that the person running against, who is the co-chair of the legislative, the redistricting committee, may prefer me not to have to campaign against him, but we'll see. I mean, I assume he's an honorable person, so. Oh.
Thank you. Commissioner Hilliard.
Let me add two things to your comments. I just asked staff and they looked at it, and District 13 is 2,800 short.
20, yeah, that's all.
From the population set in 2010. It has not grown as fast as the rest of the state. So that's an area of concern.
Okay.
Another thing you need to understand is you have to live in your district to run for state senate, state house, or school board, but not legislative, Congress.
Yeah.
Congress can live outside. The other thing I'd make to you is when you start doing these lines, you find some people get pretty jealous of their properties. And so we say, okay, we're gonna move you in this district. They say, no, we want to stay in our district. And so that's the kind of tough divisions we have. But appreciate your input. This is very helpful to help us look at it.
Commissioner Hale.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Hill, for coming and addressing us this evening. And just to, you were talking about numbers too, and you've been saying that if it's possible to keep it, similar to what it is right now. And I just wanted to point out that even in Layton, just to see the numbers from 2010 to 2020, from 67,000 in 2010 to over 81,000 to 2020. So that shifts things too. So there will be a lot of shifting that takes place just here in Davis County. So,
well, I'm going to sit down and
thank you so much for being here.
because someone informed me that I guess I have to deal with reality. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Mr. Riddle, if I could
We got one more.
address the map here.
Yes.
I know very well the person who created this map and a whole series of Davis County maps like these. These are precinct maps.
Yeah.
And the Syracuse 15, I can tell you exactly what happened there. It's a combination of a House boundary and a Senate boundary. They came very close together, and it absolutely ties the hands of the county clerks in creating the precincts. They have to follow the House, the Senate, Congressional, and the school board boundaries in preparing the precincts. And so what we have here is a combination of, if I recall correctly, a Senate boundary and a House boundary that were drawn independently, but they come very close to one another. And it, like I said, it ties the hands of the county clerks when preparing the precincts. And if I recall correctly, I work for Davis County. I think Syracuse 15 has less than 100 people in it, or at least at the time, which really compromises voter privacy. If everyone votes the same way, then there goes voter privacy. But that's the reason that Syracuse 15 is so small. is because of the closely drawn different types of boundaries.
It's triple in size now.
Yes, it is, and we've watched that area grow in Syracuse. It is growing.
Thank you. We invite other public comments, please.
Well, my name is Paul Sontag, Dr. Paul Sontag. I used to live in Weber County. And I just want to make a comment. I take a little bit of exception to Bishop's comment that this plebiscite, which we had with the vote for the population to make this committee that you have is an illegal circumstance. And what it is it was just an effort to find out the will of the people. Why is that an illegal circumstance? Yes, indeed, the legislature has maintained the authority to draw the maps, and it's disappointing to me that to hear that there's been no collaboration between this August body and the legislature. I was when we had the food tax, I was one of those guys in the middle of the grocery stores, you know, handing out, what do you think of that thing? And it wasn't a hard thing to get people to sign off against that elevation of the food tax. And it's because the people were ticked off about it. Well, guess what? I'm a physician, and when the legislature held back on Medicare expansion, guess what? It's us physicians, we were getting ticked off, and because of the people we were trying to service, we're coming uninsured into the institution. And guess what? The population was disappointed that the legislature stood on against the door and even made the federal government act, and we wouldn't act, and eventually by a clock allowed the expansion of Medicare, which is in fact service meant to the benefit of many thousands of Utah citizens. And I applaud that move because it made it a lot easier to be a good physician when people actually had some coverage. So I want to just say to you guys up there that the population is a bit jaded against our own legislature and thinking, what are they going to do? Are they going to take the control? They've had those three legislative, those votes to the populace. And this will be the third one that's knocked down if you guys aren't listening to. And I just want to tell you, well, you need to be listened to. And the maps that you have are critical, and the population is watching this. And they're going to be unhappy that the legislature ignores your positions. And I just hope you stand forth, and the rest of us will do it. And I think like that's 30% of this Utah population is Democratic. Is there a Democratic representation of a similar population in this state? Absolutely not. We got a full Republican legislation. And so Salt Lake County ought to have some legislation and a representative reflects who they are and not devoid, you know. And back where I am now, I'm in Davis County, and I'm voting with guys in Washington County. Are you kidding me? The Wasatch Front ought to have its integrity maintained, and if it happens to be rural, so be it. And I think a rural King County and a rural county in the north, it's rural, and it has a different entity and a different efforts that they are, and they want to be on horses and buggies still, but we got a little different thing in the Wasatch Front. And I think the Wasatch Front ought to be represented, and look, the people who are voting ought to look a lot like me, or by my the people that I kind of rub shoulders with, and that's, I appreciate your service, and I'm sorry to take your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kurt Weiland. I live in Bountiful. I would like to compliment what the doctor just said. First, though, all of us here deeply appreciate and we very much respect the task that you're faced with. It's an almost impossible task. There are so many different requirements as you've outlined that we do not envy the job at all. There is a specific concern that the doctor mentioned, and that is the partisanship that we face. My immediate question is, what are the checks on the legislature so that they will create a non-partisan, equal balance of districting? What are the checks on the legislature? You mentioned the requirements that they place on you. Do they have any?
There are virtually none to protect, short of public opinion and the people's willingness to leave legislators in office who are willing to undertake redistricting with partisan considerations in play. So that's one of the reasons why we feel so strongly about our work, is that we hope that our work will stand on its own and provide another perspective that we hope will have an influence, because our work is completely nonpartisan.
Everyone here supports you. I hesitate to use the word, but we're very cynical about the efforts of the legislature. That we are in a situation where the legislature is choosing its voters rather than the voters are choosing the legislature. And exactly as the good doctor explained, there are people being left out. There are voices that are not being heard. And that's not a good thing. So grateful for you. Thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Commissioner Hilliard?
I'd like to just add a clarification in my opinion. The legislative committee, and I've never served on it, the redistricting committee, all my years in the legislature, never served on it. But they have the same basic standards that we do. The question gets to be, how do you apply them? Numbers, population is objective. I can look at this numbers, and I can look at a census block, and there's 17 people there. I can't say 19 or 20, and I have to live and going within those numbers. But they have the same rules on being together, compactness. The question is how you do that subjectively. And one thing that bothers me, probably I've heard this more than anything else from people, they've come and said, well, there's 30% are Democrats, so you need to make sure we get us a Democratic Congress. And said, whoa, we are told not to take any consideration of partisan. Just like Commissioner Fisher said, we don't know where the voters are, where the incumbents live. We don't know any of that. We put together. I think Commissioner Durham was a little frustrated that they had a map they put out on this basis, and somebody read it and put the figures, oh, look, they clearly are going partisan on it. And we don't know. And so I think when you say you want us to make sure that a group is represented, the only thing we really can be sure of, we cannot look at race until we do our districts, and then we look at race to make sure that racial minority is not being discriminated against. And that's under the Federal Voting Act that binds us. But we can't sit down and say, we're going to put this group, if it has any political ties to it. And so that's the uniqueness that we have, and it's a frustration, I think, of some people. We're going to suddenly snap our fingers and have a map that everybody's going to cheer about and say, yeah, we finally did it. It's very hard. We've spent a lot of time. I know Commissioner Thorne and I have spent days going over maps and drawing lines, and not once do I ever recall us saying we need to make sure that this group is protected, that we're going to numbers, and then we go back and say, now, what did we do to the city of Layton? What did we do to the city of American Fort? What did the city of St. George? To try to then finesse it enough to keep those cities together as best we can.
Yeah, I was thinking to your question about what restrictions exist for the legislature?
Yes, ma'am.
And the answer is essentially none with respect to partisanship. But they do have all the same other federal law, voting acts, all of that, all of those criteria are the same.
Commissioner Baker?
Just a brief comment, I rarely make political statements, and I think my fellow commissioners say I'm the last person on this commission to make a political statement. I can't speak to the legislature's standards, but one thing I will speak to regarding our standards here, all 10 of them, I think it's 10, all 10 standards that we use are founded in the law in Proposition 4, as passed by the citizens a few years ago. All 10 standards are founded in law.
And that's why we appreciate you. Because everything in this discussion has been built around the basis of nonpartisanship. But what do we see in the state? That somehow between here and there, things get changed. And I'm not sure, certainly you cannot consider voting rolls, anything like that. And we respect that. But it would seem that if we have 30% of the population who are identified as Democrats, that should roughly equate to the state legislature and the Congress. A should equal B. And if all things are equal, and you're given an impossible task, and we're grateful for your efforts. How do we get the legislature to do the right thing? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
And I believe we have Representative Ward with us.
Hi, I'm Redford. I serve in the Utah House. My district is Bountiful. We've been waiting for you guys a long time to come here to our neck of the woods. Welcome. It's good to finally have you here and come get to see the process and be a part of it. And I know you've put in so much work, and so just thank you for that as you've gone along. I did just have a couple of comments, I guess, of what I hope you would consider when you thought about Davis County. One is, I would say, Davis County has grown almost exactly as fast as the state as a whole. I mean, if you just take the county as a whole and the state as a whole, we're very close on tracking along that. So I guess we would hope that there's not too huge of change in our districts all over the place, since the growth has been pretty similar. But I mean, I know there's other considerations outside the county, but that would be our hope. If you look at the map that the legislature made last time around, my understanding is that at that time they had a goal to get every district exactly down to within 1 or 2 voters. So it was balanced exactly. And when I look closely at the map, to me, it seems like in Davis County, at least, that resulted in several instances where one precinct of a city would then be over in another district. So there's some cities who you could say, well, they're lucky they got 4 representatives that are from their city, but 2 of those representatives really only have 1 precinct, and so don't really have a tie to that city. So to me, I think there can be better representation when a representative isn't pulled in 4 different directions, especially when there's only one little tiny precinct and they don't have that loyalty or familiarity. So I would hope that we would have fewer instances where there's just a really small part of the city that is off in a different legislative district. And then the third comment, and I don't know if this is within your purview or if this is the opposite of what you're supposed to do, I don't know. But to me, in full disclosure, I have drawn 2/3 of a map of House districts. I got 50 districts, and I'm like, okay. And so, you know, it has some.
The last one's the hardest.
Well, I'm trying to count how many I have left to fill them in. But to me, when you do that, and when you look at it, to me, just my way of thinking about it is there's some high level problems that in my head, I'm like, this problem has to be solved. And then, you know, in the end, this is going to filter down to how you do the district. And so to me, when I look at the map, I'd say, well, those, I don't know, they're problems, they're just what the math is. Weaver County is down a third to a half a seat. Somehow that's gonna have to play out. Those districts will have to get bigger somehow. The rural districts are down, maybe almost a whole seat. And so somehow that either means one fewer representative, or it means that they have to creep into, start picking up urban areas into the rural districts. And then are you gonna dilute the ruralness, or is there just gonna be one fewer one? In the end, it will be one or the other for those areas. And similarly, Salt Lake's down a seat. And so somehow, that's gonna change. And I don't know, again, if this is part of your purview or not, but when I looked at the maps that were online, at least for House seats, which are just so much more complicated because there's 75 instead of 4 of them, I was like, I don't even know how to make sense of these, right? I don't know
They
if
look
there
like
was,
spaghetti, don't they?
I just don't know, and again, I don't know if it's the idea or not the idea of solving those big problems, what I would regard as the higher level problems, or if you just have to kind of, go through them once at a time. So if it's permissible, to me, that's helpful to understanding a House map, maybe to say, this is a map that just has one fewer rural district. This is a map that has the rural districts all made a little larger by taking up some urban population. To me, that would be helpful in understanding the map, if that's part of what went into drawing it.
Well, part of the, and Senate, Commissioner Hilliard alluded to this in earlier comments, part of the reason the maps are so complicated is often generated by the value you have just articulated, namely keeping cities within themselves and respecting county boundaries. And so it's very messy, as you say, and very complicated.
Please, Commissioner Thorne.
Also, it was a learning process for us. So we didn't get the data until the end of August.
Yeah.
And if you look at the first maps we drew, at least for Commissioner Hilliard and I, we were just trying to keep the numbers down. And as we learned more from these community meetings and so forth, we started saying, okay, we need to pay attention to more than just the numbers. So we started trying to balance counties and try to keep counties intact. And then we've gone to the point of trying to keep cities and municipalities intact. So I think if you look at the progress of our maps over the last month, you'll see the shapes changing to try and fit cities as intact as we can.
Please, Commissioner Hale.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Ward, for being here. And just even to expand just a little bit more as all the commissioners have looked at trying to be respectful of the city boundaries and of the county lines. We've also looked at communities of interest, and that's one thing where we've really encouraged people to come forward and share with us what they believe their communities of interest are, so that we can be conscious of that as we're making maps. And as you're saying too, it is really frustrating to see that because the numbers have to drive so much of what we do, to see some communities split in such awkward ways, it's very hard. So we've been trying to be conscious of that. And we really do appreciate the input that we receive as people have told us about why their communities of interest are important and why we should be keeping them together and be mindful of those as we are creating maps. You alluded to the fact that you've worked on a few House maps and you know how difficult it is. Mapping really is a difficult task. And I guess one thing that I would ask you, Representative Ward, now, since we have you here and we appreciate you so much being here and sharing your thoughts with us, is that you knowing how hard these maps are to create, and you know that this commission has been working very, very hard, as the legislative committee has been as well. But we would hope as legislators that you will consider the work of the commission and that you will give the maps that are submitted to the committee good consideration as you make the difficult decision of adopting maps. So we just encourage you to note the work of the commission, to note that we are bound by what we feel are very good criteria as we've looked at the maps. As I understand it, the legislature adopted criteria that included the numbers, which we are all required to do, but also adopted criteria that included the addresses of incumbents. We have chosen not to do that. We have no political information that guides our work, But with that being said, we would love for you to, and encourage you to look seriously at the work of the commission as you make those big decisions.
Thank you so much, and I hope to. I'm not on that redistricting committee, right? Otherwise I'd be home in exhaustion saying
I'm gonna say count your blessings.
For sure. One thing that would help me to do that, speaking just only for myself, is if the maps that came out were in some way annotated, meaning to say, if there was one map that put more, because you're trying to balance all these criteria, right? But let's say there was a map that put more weight on, say, look, our priority in this map was city boundaries or something. Our priority in this map really was communities of interest, and this is why we do the two maps differently, especially in a really complicated map, like a house map. That helps you see at least, you know, what's trying to be
It
achieved.
does. And within our report, we will include those.
Oh, very good.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
That's a really good point. And the thing is, at the moment, we're dealing with dozens, and I don't know, are we over 100 in
Oh.
terms of draft maps? But we have a lot of maps, so we haven't been doing that at this stage, but as we pick the ones we're going to submit to the legislature, we will be doing exactly that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hilliard?
Thank you. Ray, good to see you again. Okay, let me just say this and answer your questions. When we give our report on November the 1st, we hope at that time, not only to have the maps, we'll have 3 for the Congress, 3 for the House, 3 for the Senate, 3 for the school board, to be able to explain to the committee why we've done what we've done, plus a written report that you take a look at. The point that made, we've had such short time. I mean, this has just been a full-time job just trying to do that. I'm really glad, I don't know what the legislative committee's doing, but I'm glad we spent the time working on maps. I found out where Ballard was. Found all sorts of things about the state of Utah doing those maps and trying to balance them out. But I think the important thing is that we make our presentations. I think we hope that we can explain it well enough and the points. But the biggest thing I'm afraid of is when we give our reports, we're going to have people just like Commissioner Durham said, who take political figures to what we haven't even seen. And then, aha, they did this for that and this reason. There's no way we can stop that. No way we want to stop that, but I think people need to be aware. And again, we may make some dumb recommendations because we don't really understand the nuances in each of the counties we have to work with. When we draw a line at Orem, I have no idea whether it'd be 3rd north or 4th north, but this gets the numbers where we can live with it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Jane Jenkins. I live in Layton. Thank you for visiting and listening to our comments. We always appreciate that. What is your date to give your options to the legislators? I might have missed that, and to provide our comments, when are the cutoff for us to provide our comments?
So the cutoff on comments is October 23rd. And we will be presenting our maps to the legislature on November 1st.
Mr. Bishop, what reason was the citizen voting to use independent commission maps considered unconstitutional?
Well, yeah, well, it wasn't, it was considered unconstitutional by some people, others have different views that.
No, the Constitution simply says it's the legislature.
It does. It does, but it doesn't specify in what manner it will do that. And so to avoid litigation over that issue.
They made it so. So the Utah Constitution says the legislature will do the redistricting.
Well, it says it's responsible.
Yes, that's the incumbent responsibility of the legislature. Yes.
All right. And then the question is, do you disregard the old maps and start from scratch? Or do you use them when you have questions about it? You look back and you say, well, we don't really want to change it too much, so we'll kind of stay with what the old map said and then just expand on that.
So I think the answer in part is it depends. There are times when I'm not sure if any of the teams have necessarily started with a map. I know I made an attempt to start with the map, and then you've got to start moving people from one district to another, and that it becomes much more challenging than one might think at the start. But I think there are other maps that have been drawn out of the whole cloth. So I'm not sure if anybody else would like to.
It's extremely hard when you're drawing a map. You have to make an adjustment in the southeast corner of this map. That pushes the next one over. And now you're making an adjustment there. But pretty soon you get to a place that's completely different than where you started. And you haven't even started around the map yet. So it's, at least in my view, almost impossible to keep the districts the way they are. You try and keep them grouped roughly about the same. But once you start to move one, it pushes into the next one, and then it gets amplified and pushed into the next one. And you've got to be able to get those buckles where the numbers are even.
So you're doing it from scratch, basically, even though you're pushing things around and they have to be adjusted. You're doing it from scratch and not using the old districts first and then trying to adjust them.
Well, let me add, if I may, Mr. Chair. The statute, the initiative passed by the voters said that one of the criteria is the core districts.
Actually, while I believe that was part of the compromise.
Oh, compromise?
Yeah.
Okay, and putting that together, that's one of the things that we will look at is the core districts. And I think as a practical matter, if we're gonna do something that has to pass the legislature, I think if we mix everybody up, so every legislator in a new district, it won't pass. I can just tell you that it won't pass. And so, but again, some people I know move to areas because they feel comfortable with the legislator there. That's a choice and they're moving. Now we suddenly change it. So I think I can speak for Commissioner Thorne and I. We started and went through the thing, but it's pretty hard. I think congressional district, somebody told me that the fourth district that's had all the hostility and the fight in it is 60,000 surplus. So there's got to be 60,000 people taken out of that district. And so when you start making those moves, you just find out that, well, I'll tell you another good hard example we have. Salt Lake County, the northern part of Salt Lake County, Salt Lake City, that county area has lost population. The south end of the county, Harriman and Rivers and those areas have gained. So I don't know whether Salt Lake County will stay the same number of Senate seats, but they will lose one from the north part of Salt Lake County to the south end of Salt Lake County. And so you can't really all put that all together as you try to keep it. But I think, for example, I think you need to, Box Elder County probably ought to all be together, and it probably be tied some way to Cache County because they're pretty natural. Washington County tied in another 180,000. So they're almost big enough for 2 state Senate seats in Washington County. And how you do it, I don't think we've ever sat down and said, this is what it was last time, this is exactly what we're going to do this time.
We have tried starting in different places. And when you start in different places, it has, again, ramifications as you move around. And so at least I think we've settled on the jigsaw puzzle approach, where you do the outside boundary and then you try and work in.
Okay. Just as a suggestion, I was gonna say that the ones that were old maps that were really cut out, something like, I was shocked to see or hear that Clearfield is cut up into 4 districts, something like that. That doesn't sound right. And so I would suggest that you look at, be cognizant of trying to fix past real grave errors like that. And unintended diluting of minority parties or populations. I understand you're not using that data, but sometimes geography just tells you that's what the unintended consequence would be.
I have to say, I was very impressed with the help the staff has given us, because we'll give them a draft map. And then they'll come back and tell us, okay, here's a list of cities you've split in 2 ways. And here's a list of cities you split 5 times. So we can go back and say, well, there's no excuse for a 5 split in a city. So we can try and make those adjustments. So that's the nice ability the staff has to give us input, and we'll go back and try and correct at least the most egregious mistakes in that.
Well, and we have technology that wasn't available 10 years ago. So, we can do those kinds of sweeps of the maps and Yeah, put up the data, so that's an advantage.
Yep, very good.
And I'll just add too, we've asked the input of our county clerks, because they have to implement this thing. And they're the ones that are gonna look, just as Commissioner Baker said, they're gonna look at it and say, now, wait a minute. You've given me one little district out here of 10 people. We can't do that. You can't protect their privacy of their vote. And that kind of input is coming into us as well, if we're trying to dislodge this.
Good. Right, thank you.
But can I just add one more thing here?
Please.
And I appreciate what you're saying. I think part of our answer to your other question is it depends. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. But realizing, understanding the history of how things have developed is really significant to understanding how states and counties and cities have grown and developed. And so decisions that were made 10, 20, 30 years ago, they weren't made in a vacuum. There had to be a reason for that to take place. So looking at an old map, at least lets us know, okay, they did it this way before, why? There has to be some kind of reason. That helps us to understand how we move forward in the future. It also says, as they've mentioned, there will always be, especially in the legislative maps and the House maps, especially, there's going to be a place in which you just can't keep all counties together. I call it the buckle. There's some place where people have to give, and a county, usually a rural county, has to be divided in a way that's strange and perhaps unfair, but strange. So this time it's Duchesne County 10 years ago. So one of the things we're looking at is to try and say a county has been divided significantly in the past. Maybe this time we should start with the process of keeping that one together, so at least you share the pain somewhere around the state. So yeah, we've looked at things, and I think you need to look at the past just to get a tenor of what the history of this happens to be going forward into the future.
Now, I'd like to chime in on that comment, because I think it's very important. And one of the things that this process will do that I don't think has ever been done in redistricting in this state, and that is that we're going to create a record. We're going to have a report explaining our decisions. And of course, the whole process has been transparent. Anybody who wants to can go online and watch each of our teams in the room with the maps, making the calls and the decisions. So that's going to add significantly, I think, to the history. Now, maybe nobody will ever want to look at it again, but it'll be there.
Please, Commissioner Hill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add too, as Commissioner Hilliard talked about the fact that, you know, we're coming to all of you. We want input. We're trying to glean that input from you to inform our maps. But also our executive director has been great in approaching different organizations as well. So he's met with county clerks throughout the state. He's met with our state superintendent as we look at the state school board maps. And wanting to, we want to get all of this information so that it really helps us be conscious of what is important to, to school districts, what's important to our county clerks as they're, as they're going to have the, take on the task of doing precincts afterwards. And just all of these different organizations, all the things that go into map making. And it really is important to get that input. So thank you for being here. And I just wanted to let you know too that we're reaching out to other organizations and other residents throughout the state as well.
That's good, because it has to be implemented to make it easier to implement.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a comment online. I believe it's Chase Clyde.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is Chase Clyde with the Utah Education Association, and I just wanted to hop on and thank you so much as a commission for your willingness to take input from educators at your last couple of meetings, particularly regarding the maps for the Utah State Board of Education. Educators are working on maps to submit and present to you guys. We have a few groups going, so just wanted to give you a heads up that you might see a few more teachers popping up at your meetings next week. Thanks again. I've tried to draw maps. It's hard work, so thank you so much. And one comment I will just make is we've found in order to maintain the integrity or the geographic integrity of LEAs or school districts in drawing boundaries for the State Board of Education, it helps to be as aggressive as possible, utilizing the population deviations as much as possible. So that's just a comment. I hope you'll take that into consideration as you draw maps for the State Board of Education. Use that deviation as much as you can. It really helps.
Thank you. Commissioner Hilliard.
Mr. Clyde, I'd like to ask you a question, as Commissioner Hilliard. One of the concerns we have is the time frame. The quicker you can get us those maps, the better it's going to be, because quite frankly, as indicated, we can't get comments after October the 23rd because we have a sizable report. We have to make a report on November the 1st. Now, whatever we report, we can always modify as changes and things come in, but I've been a little concerned that we're letting this go too low and long. And because the quicker you get your maps in, I think you're going to be surprised to find not everybody agrees with you. and for example, Davis County has one school district, but their population is more than enough to have one and probably a good size two people living in Davis County, representing Davis County on the state school board. Weber County is not as big as Davis, but Weber has two school districts, as Ogden City and Weber County. The really horrible one to try to put together is Utah County, because they've got Alpine on the north, Nebo on the south, and then Provo. So they've got three school districts, and both Nebo and Alpine are big enough to have over one representative. So the quicker you can get those and get it to us, and we can get them out public and get public comment on them, the easier it's going to be to come to some type of consensus. Unless you happen to have the magic wand that you're going to have the perfect map, we're going to look at it and say, great, it's done, and we're through. But I don't think so.
Although we would certainly be willing to entertain it.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but that being said, I would also say that we've had some publicly submitted maps that in my review of them, I like them better than some of the maps I worked on. So it's not that we won't pay attention. If we do get any perfect maps from any source whatsoever, we're going to use them.
Please, Commissioner Bishop.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to ask the audience that's still here and those who are listening is, as we've been coming around here, the idea was to have these local areas being able to tell us what they would like to see as these maps take place, i.e., you're going to have to, some part of this county have to be combined with other counties. And Davis County, because I grew up here, it's one long county. You can't go to the west because there's no living on animal fiber. Although they probably do have somebody in animal fiber. Anyway. You can't really go to the east, which is Morgan County, although it butts you, but that's a mountain. You're not going to get there. So you're going to either have to go north or south. And when you have to be divided, and the perfect example was talking about the state school board. You got too many people here to be in one state school board district. With whom would you like to be seen? Are you closer to going up with Weber? Are you closer to going down to Salt Lake? And the same would happen with, if you live on like where Ray lives down in the southern part of the county, there may have to be some overlapping on the county boundaries somewhere along the line. Where do you actually would rather, where do you see yourselves rather being involved with another county, another area? And that really would be extremely helpful for us as we go forward.
Thank you. Please.
Okay. I'll just let you know that Davis and Weber County do have a strong connection. We not only have Weber State Hill Air Force Base, but we are doing joint projects together as an economic zone. For that reason, I would say I would prefer to go north because I think we already have those connections underway. So that's my opinion.
And what about within the county itself? We have to divide somewhere within the county. Are there natural lines within the county? And I realize for some respect, the cities in Davis County still have a unique city atmosphere to them.
What I would say is I've heard that if ever a civil war was to start in Davis County, it would start in Kaysville, but, so,
That's my heritage.
yes. But I think that, I think South Weaver, has an identity crisis, because they have Weaver in their name, and yet they're in Davis County. I'm more middle of the county, so I can't speak for Layton. I'm sure Layton has some opinions, but anyway, natural breakoff points, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Mayor.
So you can see both of us was willing to jump right up and answer that question. And I definitely would say that we would identify more with Weaver County, not only from the fact that we have a lot of the economic development going on, but you have your Northern Utah Alliance that's been formed that's with Weaver as well, who within the chamber, you have the Davis Weaver Chamber that represent, I know that when we go down to the state legislature, we present as a northern body. So that, I think those two entities plus with our comments here, I think that's a clear definition of how we'd like to be aligned with. As far as my city and Kaysville, I mean, we've been going at it for years. So I mean, luckily, that's why Layton got formed was back in 1920 as we finally decided, okay, Kaysville, we'll take care of our own dogs. But no, all kidding aside, Layton is in a, you know, we're the largest population within the county. So I can see where this is we're going to be impacted. There's no doubt we're going to be impacted, but we do have a portion of South Weaver already that's within our boundaries. And I do know that we have a large portion of our west boundary that is represented by Speaker of the House, which we absolutely love. I mean, Layton's been sitting in a very good position as far as representation when you look at the current governing body. But honestly, I'm going to tell you once again, we're empowering you folks. We understand, and believe me, I have got on there, but there's no way I wanted your job. I do not want to play with those numbers and those lines. I've tried, and that's why I'm here tonight to say thank you. Thank you very much. And my hat's off on the fact that you were very clear in the beginning on saying that you were taking this from a nonpartisan point of view and that you intentionally left your colors off that map. I think that bodes well. And I hope that that message gets out, that you guys are really looking at it from a pure common sense point of view. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah. I need to emphasize the unique nature of Sunset. Probably not very many people have actually heard of Sunset until I moved here. It's like, wow. But Sunset is a unique community unto itself. I thought when I started campaigning that, why don't they incorporate into Clinton? And darn, so I can say there's 3 voting precincts in Sunset that they're a unique community that need to be stayed together. Also with Clinton.
Can you describe their characteristics?
Oh,
Well, just short list.
Sunset is.
Because you're talking about a potential community of interest.
Sunset, how do you describe it? It's a small community with not a large commercial base, but they're nice people. I hate to say it, but when you go to Clinton and West Point and maybe even Clearfield, when you're campaigning, you get some pretty what I'll call bastard people to respond to you. And one of the things about Sunset is that while they do exist, there is a significantly fewer number of people that really are what I call mean sort of behavior people there.
That's one we haven't heard about before. I love that.
So all I can say is that it is a unique community that unfortunately is going to be split in north and south by dividing of 1800 north, or fortunately, but what can do about that. But also in Clinton and West Point, there's an interesting thing that they talk about is that they have a reversal language up here in North Davis, and they talk about, instead of Salt Lake, I live in Salt Lake, it was usually up there and down there. But when you live in North Davis County, they reverse their geography, and instead of saying down there, it's up there or something like that. So they kind of, in Northern Davis, all I could say, and I've never asked these questions specifically, but I get a feeling that we're more Weaver County than Davis County. In fact, I don't think she's gonna like this, but there's kind of a North Davis and a South Davis, kind of, at least in my mind, and Centerville is kind of right in the middle. So it's so big that I would just be on the Salt Lake City School Board. And I'll tell you, Davis is so huge that I don't see why there isn't a North Davis and a South Davis school district, because it's just, I don't want to get involved too much, but yeah, so in response, I would concur that the north part of, at least for Davis County, there is this Weaver connection. And just that I could be biased because my dad was born in Ogden, Utah, in Taxicab, so there is kind of a identification with that. So, okay, I'll stop. So anyway, that's.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we should go down how the county commission used to be more central and south. That happened in probably late 60s, when somebody in Bountiful tried to return in the northern counties. Election.
All right, any other public comments? Not seeing anybody getting up, not hearing any, we'll go ahead and close the public comment section of our meeting. And we want to talk about map refinement. And so, Gordon.
The best part of the meeting. So what I want to first say is that I had been really excited over the last month and a half how good the mapping process has been. We've looked at your maps a lot of ways. When Cassie's come back and did mean or just said, here's some issues you guys have worked, all of you worked very hard to make your maps really, really refined. And as you put the time into it, the maps have been really good. As we've been running these analysis, just really impressed. And so that's been a very exciting part of this whole process. The other part that's really been great is each one of you we've watched as you come back from these public hearings have gone back and agonized how you can address the public comments. Even though you split someplace that you don't want to, you look at all the ramifications and sometimes you fix it. And sometimes you say, these issues have prevented us from doing these things. And in each case, it's been a really good experience to see that process go about. It's a truly independent process where each of you in your own way try to address those with the maps. And so I want to start off making you feel good about yourselves. Now, no. Yeah, it's been great. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is we're putting the final report together. And as we've done that, we've been looking at the criteria in the report to address that the commission has followed the regulations that you guys adopted. And so in the actual statute that we have, 3.2, 3028.b, it says, in conducting evaluation described in subsection 8A, commission staff shall use judicial standards as determined by the commission, the best available data and scientific methods. And so one of the things that we're going to do is I'm going to have Cassie do a little bit of the description of how she's been running the analysis. So you kind of have that basis of what she's been bringing to you. But the second part of it is she's going to describe briefly the next level of how we do those evaluations. And one of the things that was a real benefit for us in bringing Matt and great Member Quinny on board as our legal counsel, is we got some outside expert, preeminent expert help in looking at these things. And so now that we're in the final stages of looking at our maps, we want to give this brush through of all these analysis. And I wanted to go through, we've talked a lot about the partisanship and the fact that you guys are not seeing that information. But one of the criteria that we have in our ordinance is to determine that there's no undue favoring. And I think we want to make sure that we get a standard, what is that? And have you, and give you the ability to see that. You won't see the partisanship in terms of where people are at, but the criteria to show that we've achieved this. We want to show the legislature how we didn't just achieve not splitting communities, but how we address this as well. And so as part of that, we wanted to have the outside counsel kind of explain the standards of which that's looked at, and then kind of get everybody's buy-off on that process. So what I want to do is first have Cassie, and she promised to be nice this time, but talk about the report card she's been doing, the analysis, and then kind of next level of that. So, and we'll kind of take it from there. And the one other thing I wanted to comment, go ahead.
I just had a quick question, Gordon. If you do an analysis of what we've done and come back in and say, this is overly partisan, will you tell us it's overly favor the Republicans or the Democrats, and how it is? Because unless we know that information, how can we really correct it? And that's the information I don't want to hear.
Right, and I guess this is the issue, is that when we said to you, you split this many cities this way, we immediately showed you the number of cities and how many people, and there was a lot of detail you got.
And we went back and corrected this best we did.
No, and let me make sure that was clear. You went back and fixed it, because this has been a long process. We don't want to make in this process, add into this process where you see partisan data. So we're wrestling with that as an issue, because we think you've made the right choice and we want to support you in that. But we also want the report to reflect the issue. So right now, we want to talk about what this report would entail. And this is the important thing to remember, is that as soon as you started making the changes, for example, community of interest, when we were down in Moab, one of the things that came very clear is that their school district extends into San Juan County. And if you wanted to keep a county boundary there, that would have separated community of interest. And we determined it would be, in my mind, and I think you did too, it'd be better to compromise and not and split the county and bring that's, I think it's Spanish Canyon or Spanish
Valley, yeah.
Spanish Valley up into Moab. And so it's better to degrade the county split and let that slip a little bit, because it was more important to keep that community together. I think you saw the same things when we were looking at some of the other places. For example, in Draper, a large portion of its city splits Utah County and Salt Lake County. Is it better to keep the city whole or split the county? And I notice all of you wrestle with that, and you're trying to figure out which is the right choice. And I'm not saying which is the right choice. The right choice is to agonize over it, think it through, and something's going to have to give. The maps aren't fair. They're just great maps. There's going to be some point where somebody had to have that buckle, or where those things came. But we want you to see the give and take through the process. So anyway, that's important to us, that we complete a final map that gives the best scientific data for each of the criteria that we're putting forward. So, and the last issue I wanted to say is that this last 2 weeks, particularly this next week, will be important, because what I've seen is your refinement has made the maps great. You had pretty good maps when you first started, but each time you've come in and worked on them, they've gotten better. And we want to have outstanding maps. So We will give you as much chocolate as you need to endure the sessions of mapping. We'll spare no expense of ruining your health to keep you for the next 2 weeks finishing up the maps.
Thank you. Cassie? So please, Commissioner Bishop.
I either did not understand the question or did not understand the answer. So let me try this one more time. If you're going to do some kind of analysis on partisanship with our maps, we specifically have asked for no election data. And unless we have the 2018 was an outlier, and the 2016, 2014 data, we can make some assumptions. But without that data, we cannot actually come up with a definitive number of what those things are. My assumption is you're not going to give us that data, right?
I'm not going to give it.
And we don't want that kind of data. So on what basis will the analysis be used?
The basis will be, it will go into the report. And just like all the other data, it will be different than the other data in that we won't give you a way to fix it. You're just going to know it.
Well, why are you giving it to us in the first place?
I think it's required by the statute to put in the report, and I don't want something in the report that you're not seeing.
So the point is that the analysis will critique our product for the use of the legislature, which is going to be strangely anomalous because they don't care about they are looking at the partisan data from the beginning, and we're not. So it's very strange.
It's strange. We're going to give you a report that's going to define community of interest, and we're going to talk to you. We're going to have a criteria report. We're going to give you a criteria for splitting communities. We're going to give you all that criteria. Some of it you'll have access to fix. We just want to have an element in our report that addresses each of the aspects of the things that you've done. Anyway, but we want, this one we have not spent a lot of time out, so we want to address how that criteria works so that you understand what it is we're doing, because the questions you raised are exactly the importance of whether this data is valuable or not.
And there's still some ongoing question with council to make sure that we are complying with the statute and our criteria at the same time.
So I'll be back, but again, the only thing I really wanted you to hear is that we meet each of you every day next week from about 7 in the morning to 11:30 at night. That's it.
For which we don't get paid other than
the chocolate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gordon said I'd be nice, so I guess I'll start with a compliment. One thing I will say is I really appreciated how you've gone back as teams and have corrected your maps based on things we've suggested. And I really appreciate the time you spent on that, especially after I gave you a list of city splits, and it's really daunting to approach that. So I just wanted to thank you for that. So what I wanted to focus on tonight is kind of talk about where we've been. So each week we've tried to give you a new piece of the criteria to help fix, right? So we started out with county, then we did city. We talked a little about cores of prior district and things like that. But every time we've talked about each of these items, we've only been comparing between the maps that you've drawn, right? And as you know, and you've talked about it in this meeting several times, you make different choices and each way you approach a map is different, whether you start on the outside and go in or start in and go out, right? Each of that has a different implication. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure book, right? As soon as you pick one block and you put it in the district, you've chosen a path, right? And those add up over time. So we're only seeing a small picture of what could possibly be mapped in the state. So what we're doing is we're working with a group that council has suggested. And what they're going to do is they're going to use the software and they're going to code. So they're going to have 10,000 maps. So 10,000 different approaches to mapping. And it's all done by the computer. And what information we'll gain from that is how many city splits can we eliminate, or what's good and what's bad? Like how many plans have this many city splits versus how many plans feature this many city splits. So then if you're all drawing similar maps, which I don't believe to be true, I think they all have different tastes and flavors to them. we can see how they compare to the maps you didn't draw. And I think that helps create more informed maps, right? So you can say, okay, if I really want to focus on not splitting cities, I can see that this plan does it better. I can see that this is possible versus just what we know amongst the maps you've created thus far. So that's something we're really focusing on. So they'll go ahead and tell us that kind of information, county splits. And the other thing too is to note that like this program doesn't replace you, right? Like no algorithm that draws a map is gonna know about how the students in the school district in South Moab need to be together because that's how they function, right? So this is just to give you more information overall. It's like the final step is looking at, okay, what haven't we considered and what's a good way to look at that? Does that make sense? That's like our next analysis. So I think it's just really important to take and look at not only what the public has submitted, what you've done, but what's possible overall. So that's like our final step. Do you have any questions about how ensembles work?
Yeah, I'm wondering, how is this going to be presented to us?
So tomorrow, like, where do you want to talk about it?
Today. So we have, Professor Persley, Tyler with BYU, and Moon is going to present to you what they did in Michigan. So I want you to see the Michigan process and then relate it to what we're doing here, because if you see the partisan data in Michigan, it shouldn't influence you. So that's what we want you to see, is how this process works, so you have comfort in what we're showing. Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is our maps are going to be reviewed by everybody. Everybody's going to see them and they're going to be reviewed. So this information is going to be out there. We want you to have it first, and we want this to be part of a report to the legislature. Their maps are going to be, everybody's maps are going to be in there. Michigan has theirs done, so this is available for you to see. So we want to turn this over to Moon, and she's going to present this to us. So
great. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Moon.
All right, terrific. So my name is Moon Duchin. I'm a professor of mathematics at Tufts University in the Boston area, and came and joined you tonight with my friend and colleague Tyler Jarvis from BYU, whom you've heard from before. And we'd like to show you a little bit of what this kind of comparative analysis can look like. So I've prepared a few slides, but don't worry, it won't be a giant lecture. So let's see if this works well. Okay, can you see that full screen okay?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Tyler and I are both mathematicians. So you heard some comments about wanting to understand maps scientifically, and that's really what we do. I study geometry and dynamics. Tyler studies computational mathematics. And between the two of us, we both got really fascinated by redistricting over the span of the last 5 years. I started a lab that does redistricting full-time, an interdisciplinary lab over at Tufts. And we're working in a number of states. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense tonight of what that might look like. And I'm going to use some examples from Michigan just because it's safely not Utah, just to show you what a kind of comparative analysis might do to help you in this final stretch as you have a number of plans that you're trying to compare and think about, as Cassidy said, not only how they compare to each other, but how they compare to opportunities that you didn't draw, that you might have drawn. And I want to try to give you a sense of how this can be constructed. So the first thing I'll do is pass the mic to Tyler, who will talk a little bit about this process of building lots and lots of plans to compare against.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so as Cassidy said, and Dr. Duchin said, the first thing we need to do to evaluate plans is to have some kind of baseline of what's possible and what's typical. So we need to build large collections or large ensembles of many different plans or maps. And we do this in two different ways. So first, we have a large collection of computer-generated plans. And second, we'll also look at plans drawn by the public that have been submitted. But the computer-generated plans, so let me just explain briefly how those are generated. So we'll start with an existing plan and then randomly choose 2 adjacent districts and merge those 2 districts into one, and then redivide just that merged district again in a different way. And then we'll do that thousands of times, and the result is a completely different map. So this slide here is illustrating how that can proceed. That method is called recom because we recombine two districts and then divide them again. And so one of the things that we'll want to take account of when we're doing this in Utah, as Commissioner Facer said in his introduction, we don't want to, when we're talking about things being adjacent, whether it's blocks or voting districts or whatever, when we talk about them being adjacent, we don't want to think of them as being adjacent if they're separated by, for example, the Great Salt Lake. So we have here, this is the upper part of Utah, and what I've plotted here are VTDs in Utah. And if you just took all the obvious adjacencies in Utah, then you would see then you would get all the lines that are all these lines here. So each dot here corresponds to the center of one of these voting districts, and then each of the lines corresponds to a connection to an apparently adjacent voting district. But if we want to take account of natural boundaries, then we have to remove many of these adjacencies. So the red lines marked here are adjacencies that we would take out when we do this, when we construct these maps. So as the recom method works by taking 2 adjacent districts and then combining them and then redividing them, but we would not combine things that were separated by, for example, the Great Salt Lake or mountain range or a wilderness district.
Okay, great. And then I'll just jump back for a second to say, the other thing that's specific. So it's great to have Tyler on the team who's extremely knowledgeable about Utah geography and enables us to be able to do something more geographically sensitive. But also between the 2 teams, we've put together a nice data set of recent elections. So 10 elections from 2016 to 2020 that we hope kind of give some of, you can sort of see the sea level rise and fall for the different groups and parties and candidates over the course of that period. So that's going to help us understand something about the plans. Okay, so that's background. So then as promised, let's move to Michigan. So I'm just going to tour very quickly through some data visualization that shows you how you might take your plans, random plans, and public plans and kind of put them all together in a way that helps you make some decisions. So let's just start by, so recently the Michigan Commission put out 10 sample plans, 4 for Congress and 3 each for Senate and House in Michigan. And my team, just as we're doing in many states, took a look at those plans and compared them to alternatives. So let's just quickly look at some traditional districting principles for these congressional maps. So one is you can take a look at how those plans split counties. And so on the left, so the Michigan Commission has nicknamed their plans with tree names. So apple, birch, juniper, and maple are the code names of their congressional plans, their draft plans. And you can see how many counties are split by each of the plans. And then in gray, this is actually not 10,000, but 100,000 maps made in, you can make those these days in a couple hours, make a really nice ensemble of maps that are all population balanced, compact, contiguous, respect counties, and you can layer in other criteria when you want them. And then in blue, you see, in this case, 112, I call this the citizen ensemble instead of the computer ensemble. So this is, in this case, 112 plans that came in from the public to the public portal that the commission set up and that passed the basic tests of validity in order to be kind of worth plotting on the map. And then the colored lines that you see are the draft plans. And so what we see is that the draft plans are pretty good. They split a few more counties than the computer algorithm plans do, but they're pretty good in comparison to the citizen plans. And they're not that different from each other. 3 out of the 4 have just 13 county splits. And then on the other side of this plot, you see the number of pieces that those split counties are cut into. And there you see kind of a very similar picture. The proposed plans are comparable to each other. You could do better if you were doing it by computer, but this is important. Computers aren't as good at redistricting as people are. They don't know what you know about the communities unless you tell them. They only know what you tell them. And so this particular ensemble, it's not necessarily going to be as good, but it gives you a sense of kind of a baseline, as Tyler was saying before, for what a really good county integrity plan might look like if that were the top priority. So, oh, right. And then, like I said, those are the commission plans. So let's see a couple more principles. Like here's a compactness score. So this is a compactness score called cut edges. And in this, less is better. So a smaller score is better. And now you see in gray, that's the computer. In blue, that's the humans. And now you actually see that the human submitters are actually beating the computer here. And they're coming up with plans that are a little more compact than that recombination method that you saw. And then you see the plans, the colored stripes are the plans from the commission that are kind of fairly good against these comparators and fairly similar to each other. I have a few more slides like this to show, but let me pause and ask if you have any questions before I ramble on.
I'm not hearing you.
Okay, hearing no questions, let's proceed. A very live question for you is how to think about partisan balance in the face of a proscription on using partisan data. That's a tricky thing to do. And so what I want to do is show you what an analysis based on that partisan data might look like elsewhere. And then maybe it will inform your decision about how to interpret your competing goals of partisan fairness and not overly or at all using partisan data. So here's what that might look like. So let's look at proportionality. Actually, you had a public comment. It was fun to hear some of the public comments tonight. And one of them said, why doesn't 30% of a party that gets 30% of the votes, why don't they get 30% of the seats? Said your commenter. He said A should equal B. Well, that idea is proportionality. And so what you see on this slide, and I'll zoom in so we can see it a little better. What you see on this slide is a number of different elections recently conducted in Michigan. So these are actual recent elections. President 16 and then some statewide elections in 2018. And the blue line marks the vote share. So as we all may remember from 2016, Trump slightly, won Michigan by a very small margin. And so that proportionality line is just below 50-50 from the Democratic point of view. There's a nearly even Trump and Clinton share. However, what the colored dots are showing you the proposed maps from the commission. But now what you're seeing in gray is all those random plans that we drew without any partisan data. So our random plans, like you, don't look at any partisan data. And what you can see is that, the world is a little tilted away from A equals B, even though there's a nearly even vote. Democrats usually get, when you do party blind redistricting, it's typical for Democrats to get 4 to 5 seats, which is 30 to 38% of the vote rather than the 30 to 38% of the seats rather than the 50% of the vote. And so from that point of view, it gives you a real context to understand those colored dots. They're doing a pretty good job at being close to proportionality, and they're doing that within the universe of like blind redistricting possibilities. And that's how to interpret this. I'll say a little bit more about this slide, and then I think this is a key slide. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. As you look throughout those other 2018 elections, you see something pretty similar. What I see when I look at this is that all 4 of those dots are pretty close to each other. So all 4 of the plans they're considering officially, the consensus plans of the commission, have pretty similar partisan properties. They tend to be at or near that proportionality line, whether the sea level rises for Democrats or whether it falls over the span of these different elections with different candidates. And again, what you see in gray, that kind of violin plot there, that's the random plans. And if I go back a little bit, you'll see on the right, the blue is the citizen plans. That's those 112 plans. And they look pretty similar to plans that were made without any partisan data. So I'll pause again and see if there's any questions. Okay, and hearing none, I'll show you a couple more things. So next up, you can look at all kinds of other metrics. Like one of them is called efficiency gap. But something you might notice if you remember 2 slides ago, efficiency gap looks really similar to that seats plot. And that's a fact about efficiency gap. That if it's a popular metric out there, but really it's pretty closely keyed to the seats outcome. So the difference is that efficiency gap tells you to aim for 0, whereas the seats outcome doesn't necessarily tell you what the fairest or best place to be is. So the information on this slide is really quite similar. There are lots of other popular metrics out there. For instance, there's one called mean median, there's one called partisan bias. These are part of a family called partisan symmetry metrics. One of the things that Tyler and I wanted to do tonight was come and say, we know there are like 1 trillion metrics out there and 1 trillion report cards and 1 trillion kind of different scores flying around and trying to tell you what's going on. Partly we are coming as scientists who think about this and think about which scores are best suited for which kind of analysis. And both of us have independently found both that the mean median gap and the partisan bias to be frequently misleading and particularly badly suited to Utah. I actually have a recent paper out about this in the journal Political Analysis, where we dub this the Utah paradox and actually show that these metrics even get the which party is advantaged wrong in a lot of examples. So these exist and you can certainly plot them, but there are reasons to think that they might not be your best bet and that just actually looking at the seats outcome might be more informative. Tyler, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree completely with
Okay.
what you
Well,
said.
great. That's good. Good sign. Okay, just a little more. You can look at things like how many districts are competitive. And here in the Michigan plans, they're not quite as competitive. They're not quite finding as many competitive districts as the neutral plans or the citizen plans are. And here by competitive, I meant if you lay the districting plan over a vote pattern and a district has a margin of within 6 points, so 47-53 or closer, we call it competitive. That's arbitrary and you could do something else, but it's easy to make plots like this at your direction. Here's one that I find really informative: swing districts. So that asks the question, is a district sometimes over the elections in your data set, sometimes won by one party and sometimes another? So how to read this is Michigan's congressional districts, there are 13 of them. And that green stripe here is telling you that the Birch plan has only one swing district out of 13. And that means the other 12 never change hands over all the elections in the data set. 6 of them are always Democratic, 6 of them are always Republican over each of those elections, and only one swings, right? And then the other 3 commission proposed plans have 2 swing districts. And so this is really a place where they're leaving some opportunity on the table, where both random plans and citizen plans tend to have more districts that can change hands between the parties. So if you think that this kind of responsiveness, that's what this is. This is saying, as the will of the voters shifts, do you want your delegation to shift with it? That's what it means to have a swing district. I'll note, I'm showing you these slides one at a time, and these seem to isolate different properties of a districting plan, but the properties interrelate. So if you remember here, green, the Birch district, I think it's green, my screen is in night shift mode now. This one has few swing districts. If you go back a few slides and look at the seats plot, you'll notice that it's always really close to 50-50. In fact, it's always at 6 or 7 Democratic seats because only one seat swings. So that's, if you're in a 50-50 state like Michigan, that's one way to get to proportionality, is with really safe seats for both sides. And this is just a question for you as you deliberate your democratic principles. How do you want to go about creating a plan that has the kind of partisan fairness properties that you desire? Okay, so that's about all I have to say. I think there's one more slide on Congress, and that's racial statistics. So it's imperative to satisfy the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965, still the law of the land. More, kind of binding it, or sort of, it puts more constraints on your redistricting in some states than other states. For instance, in Utah, it won't be relevant at the congressional level, but may well be relevant at the state house level. And so just to give you a sense, these kinds of ensemble techniques can also give you a view of how, you know, in the case of Michigan, one relevant minority is Black voters. And this shows you how the Black voting age population is distributed over the districts. And the colored dots, once again, show you the proposed plans of the commission. And those boxes and whiskers are showing you those 100,000 random maps. So this is just giving you a sense that even though random maps frequently have a majority Black district, none of the districts in the commission's plans do get to a majority in terms of Black voting age population. Okay, I won't go through this in great detail for Senate and House, but just say, you know, unfortunately for Senate, there were a lot fewer viable plans from the public, only 7, but you can still see how they stack up against each other. You can look at compactness. You can look again at the partisan balance. And once again, the commission plans do a pretty good job of being proportional. You can take a look at competitive districts. And here, unlike in Congress, they have a larger number of competitive districts and a larger number of districts that can swing. But one thing that I notice when I go through these is how similar their 3 proposed plans are to each other in almost all of these ways. And that suggests they might not be getting, you know, as much variety out of these consensus plans as would have been possibly preferable. And then a similar racial statistics plot. And then I'll close by saying you can do the same thing for state house. In this case, you know, there are 110 districts in the House in Michigan, and there were 0 viable plans from the public, unfortunately. Hopefully that won't be true in Utah. So we're here just comparing against the computer ensemble, and you can see county splits again, compactness, these partisan plots, competitive districts, swing districts, and a plot making it quite clear that in terms of Black voting age population, it was distributed quite differently than what would have happened if it had been blind. Okay, so those are the slides that I have prepared. And now Tyler and I would love to, first of all, take some questions if you have any, but also just hear from you whether and how you think this might be helpful as you land the plane in the next couple of weeks.
So what I want to do is talk about why we had this discussion. So Cassidy and I were looking at, you know, days, redistricting, plan score, and trying to figure out what is the right process. And the problem with those are like closed systems. So we don't know what the algorithm is. So we think it's critical that we know this level of detail so we're not guessing. People are going to run those regardless of what we do. And we don't want that to be the narrative. We want to have clear, concise data. So what our intent is, Tyler has 100,000 generated the plans for Utah. And so Monday, we want to have moved back in our regular meeting and present this data for Utah. But we want to have you kind of ask, verify, have any questions about this process, what they're putting into this to make sure you're comfortable with the, you know, the algorithms, the math, the science behind what we're trying to put together. So we put this in the report. We all understand what it means and what it's doing. So it's really, she's back in New York, so it's 2 hours later, so we might get moving. No, they stay up late in New York. It's up in all hours of the night.
Well, just Boston, you know, we're a small town of Boston.
Oh, Boston. That's where you are. Okay, sorry. Back east is just one.
Yeah, understood.
Anyway, any questions you have or want to delve into it a little bit more?
I guess it's on. My concern is the information on the competitive districts. I mean, I have a personal view about whether the country is better if there are competitive districts or not. But I don't see that as part of our charge. Our charge was to develop nonpartisan districts that.
So you do that off of it.
I mean, As a citizen, I would like to know that information, but I don't know that that's part of our charge.
Okay.
Yeah, these are just sort of a menu of options. And the question is, we've been trying to refine a sense of what metrics are best answerable to Utah's criteria. But really, these are just a set of suggestions. Many other things we could measure. We could measure the sort of change from the prior district, since that is referenced in your criteria. Pretty much, if you can make it precise, we're pretty good at measuring it. And so the question is really to you of what you'd like to see your plan stacked up against.
Well, I think one, all of the criteria, whether it's courts of prior districts, the city and county splits, or geographic features, those kinds of things. I think that could be quite helpful. I think where I'm getting some sense of concern is having political data that we can't do anything about, but at the same time, I think from the staff's perspective, if I'm understanding, what you want to do is make sure that we're not favoring or unfavoring unduly, let's see, purposeful or undue favoring or disfavoring.
Inadvertent.
Yeah, inadvertently, yeah. So,
We want Christine to be able to answer her neighbor when she gets criticized.
Well,
No,
yeah, on the other hand, I mean, I don't want to recommend to the legislature a map which turns out to unfairly favor or disfavor a political party or a racial group or anything else. So, this is still striking me as I don't understand yet what's going to be going on. If we are notified, if the analysis demonstrates that we have done that inadvertently, I don't understand how we cannot revise our selection of maps accordingly.
And that's a decision of the commission.
But how? But how? We don't know what's wrong. Does that mean we got too many here, too many there? What does it mean?
Well, I don't know. At least it's a start. It depends on where it is. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. And nobody's ever done this before either. So, but I'm very concerned. I think it would be violative of our mission should we, knowing that we've inadvertently violated one of our standards, one of our criteria, if we don't, I mean, maybe it's enough to put it in the report and articulate why. But I'm going to be hard pressed to say I like this map when I know the map is defective.
Mr. Bishop.
Well, no, I appreciate the conversation we're having here, and I especially appreciate Judge Thorne's comments. In some respect, what you're talking about are the values that we establish that are outside the wall. And even, some of the academic studies that you sent to us, forced me to actually read through them.
I hope you pass those along to your students, so.
Was it Kimbrell, the last one, that actually did a critical analysis of competitive districts and the effectiveness of it? Not correlation that came through that. Same thing if we're dealing with proportionality. We specifically are not doing that. We don't have a proportional system. We have a single member district system, which is entirely different than that. So I'm concerned as far as the kinds of values that we may be imposing into the process that are not necessarily part of our charge, nor should they be part of our charge. I think that was the question you were putting there, and I'd like, before we go further and adding this into the report, have some serious discussion about what those values that we're trying to transpose into the system really are. These would be just drawing the damn lines.
Actually, if I could just make one comment in response to that, I mean, I think you're exactly right that when you elevate a kind of property in a vacuum like proportionality or efficiency gap or what have you, it ignores that districts don't always behave that way. But that's why the method that we've developed really shows you how districts do behave. That's That's those 100,000 plans that you see there. And they're not, you're exactly right. They're not that often at that proportionality line. They're a little bit somewhere else. And so what that enables you to do is see how your plan compares to other plans and not just how it compares to some ideal that may or may not be yours or in your criteria, if that makes
Or
sense.
even achievable.
Or even achievable in some cases, right?
Other thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think I'm at the point of saying, well, let's give it a shot, see in what ways it is useful or not useful, and have our discussions based on the presentation.
I guess my concern though is that if we start taking a look at the political data, does that taint our genuineness of the report that we are doing as nonpartisan?
What do you mean by political data? What is it?
Well, I mean, if
we're
we're looking at competitiveness of districts,
Well,
if we're looking
competitiveness
at
of
what-
districts is political, but it's not partisan. So I'm not sure if there's an important distinction there.
we've tried very hard to keep all the partisan stuff out of the conversations as we're drawing maps. Lyle and I are never talking about, well, this district or this community favors this group or another. Once we start to inject that analysis into our report with the opportunity to change anything, at that point, if we change it, we are now reacting to political information that I don't know was our charge, and I think may be violative of our goal of staying away and simply trying to be fair and non-political as we're drawing lines.
That is true, but that will obviate the criteria that we have adopted not to favor or disfavor. That'll just go away. We'll have no way of even thinking about it. And maybe that's what we have to do, given the weight we place on the other criteria, but there's something in there that we're supposed to be doing.
If I may, I guess the difference becomes, in my mind, the process through which we go through versus the end results. And if the end results is now going to go back and say, well, you inadvertently did these things, and we need to go back and correct them, then I said we should have done that day one. That's my concern with it. And again, I guess I'm just skeptical as a trial lawyer, knowing that it doesn't take me very long to find a number of different experts who all disagree. And they can all give different testimony, and sometimes even the judges don't know who to believe. But that's why I don't mind if they come back and say, according to our metrics, this is not, but see, we should have had in the law, in the initiative, they should have had the provision, competitive districts. They should have had those kinds of things.
Well, it's the legislature's law. It's the legislature that should have.
No, but it's not. So we should all quit because it's not there. I mean, that's, as you go back through, I have gone back and read the petition that was signed by the people that started out, but I don't know if it had it in. I've always been under the impression that the whole thrust of our committee was to be maybe not political, nonpartisan, however you want to divide that up. But the minute you start talking about, well, this district votes predominantly Republican, or this votes predominantly Democrat, I think you bring the political and partisan all in it. And I think that's what we're not supposed to do.
But what do you want to do with the language in the statute and in our criteria, specifically addressing favoring or disfavoring?
I think we did that in our whole process. We never discussed political process. The whole process went through never talking about partisan or political or that. And I think that's what the statute means. But in the process, that's what we do.
So the facts only process.
Yeah, let it fall right
away. Right.
So each of these, we wanted to have a criteria from a staff perspective. It says that we won't, didn't bring paper over with me, but if we want to have some measurement to show that we accomplished that. So even though we didn't have the data, you've drawn all the maps are all finished, well, not finished, they need to be refined, certainly. the unnecessary. It appears to us, as we've read through the statute, that we should not unnecessarily favor any political party. We don't know that. And at this point, we want to tell the legislature and the people and the public and ourselves what we did. And so that's why we're going through, we've had Cassidy going through and giving you each piece of the analysis. Now we want to elevate that with these 100,000 maps. So with these 100,000, you're going to see how many times you split a community in that group. So you won't be just compared among yourself, but among all these maps. And that you may find that maybe we're a little too rigid on that, and maybe there's some other criteria that we need to bring into focus. But also this undue favoring, I don't know that we need all the criteria they did in other cities, other states. Those are all going to happen after we're done. But I'd like to be able to say in the report something in there about the undue favoring. Did we accomplish that through this process? And that's a decision of the commission.
Well, and I think it's a very interesting question. As I understand my colleague's point, it is that in the process, we did not, unnecessarily favor or disfavor, and in that we didn't do it intentionally. Essentially, I think what their argument does is to import an intentional part, an intentional action standard into the criteria. And that you can distinguish between what we were doing in terms of the process and what we got in terms of the result, which I think in terms of interpretation of that language, that's a really, I see it as an open question right now, but it's certainly a legitimate perspective.
So you're telling me our attorneys are saying we can't unnecessarily favor or disfavor, but if we necessarily favor or disfavor, that fits the language of the law.
I don't know that I've asked that specific question, but I think you illustrated correctly. Nobody has gone in there and purposely tried to do this. And so I think we've achieved that. We went through in our process. However, when you tried to keep communities together, Cassidy came and still criticized, saying, hey, you did this. And so you went back, and because the criteria was to try to keep cities together, you fixed it. Now, I'm not saying you could do that with this one because you're blind. You don't see the political data. That's different than with the cities and the counties. But the criteria is that I don't want to say precise. We gave you an opportunity to look at some form of criteria to consider. Now, we've let you draw, we didn't let you, you were in charge, you drew the maps. And we did not try to put this out there, but at some point we're writing this report and we've come to this section and it's kind of blank. And so we want to say, did we unduly favor a party or not? And so that's something we want to figure out.
And I don't have a problem with it being in the report, because as you've said over and over, there are going to be lots of different analysis and everybody will skew it the way they want. But if we can say, according to these mathematicians and other analysis, here's what the result was. But this was the result of a process that did not consider party or incumbency or other things. And here's where the cards fell.
And I'm good with that. I want you to know this is your report. We intend to hand it to you to review it and verify that this is what you want to submit to the legislature. It's not staff's report, although staff's moving along the writing right now. It's really your report, and we're putting your words to paper. And we want you to say, yeah, that's how we feel about this. So that's our gestures. This is from the commission as a whole.
So part of what I'm hearing is there's some willingness to have the staff look at this, but there's some hesitancy on the commission as to how we deal with this data. I think Part of it is, I wish Commissioner Bishop were still here because I was gonna, he asked the question on cost.
He'll be back.
This is coming out of the legal budget that has already been allocated. Our understanding is it will be relatively modest as well. It's part of the public service that these academics are willing to do. So we're very grateful.
Quite modest indeed.
And here's the thing that I think is really important for staff, is that we want something that is reputable. Again, and I think Lyle's correct. There is a lot of options out there, and they're correct in their own sphere of what they're trying to accomplish and do. We're trying to get something, and this is something that is being done throughout the United States. It's recognized. Democrats use it, Republicans use it, everybody uses this. It's not a experimental. This is a way to determine if something is, and again, you have a portion in the middle where if you land there that is pretty clean, it's going to be fairly nonpartisan. But if you have an outlier, then you're going to have pretty reasonable certainty. And again, it's not to direct you how you do things. When we told you some of the city splits, you didn't change some of them. It wasn't, this is what you have to behave, this is what you have to do. We're aware of this. And this is a little different because I believe the commission has rightfully decided not to review partisan data. I think the commission rightfully decided not to look at incumbency. And this has that touch of it. And so we're trying to be careful, and that's why we're not showing you anything. We showed you Michigan, so hopefully that doesn't bias anybody here. But we want this report to be credible in this area as well.
So I think my sense anyway, and I'll see how the other commissioners feel, is that I'd like staff to look at this and see if it's something that rises to the level of concern, and then with our attorneys figure out how in the world we respond, or if we even do respond, as Commissioner Thorne has said it, and maybe our response is we recognize that we did this operating blindly, and out of our 3 maps, one of them's cattywampus, or alternatively, we've got these 5 or 6 maps that we're choosing from. Maybe we don't choose that map. I don't know. But I think having staff to have some of that information would be useful. Okay. Commissioner Baker.
I hope I followed this conversation well enough. It's been very deep, but some of it's over my head, quite honestly. I keep hearing about political data and political information reporting on how our work is, if I can even think of the right words here, how the political outcome will be. But I have to say I'm a little nervous about having this kind of political data anywhere near this commission while we're drawing the maps at all. I don't want it to be within 100 miles of this commission. We have been incredibly fair. I have not seen a single member of this commission even remotely consider political data. And I'm thrilled about that. Once our work is done, analyze till the cows come home, and I'm willing to look at it then. But I don't want it anywhere near us in the meantime. And I hope that's a correct line of thought. So yeah, let's look at it afterwards. I'm fine to look at it. Maybe we're way off base in our approach. Maybe we're right on. But don't tell me the results. Don't show me data. Don't show me resulting data until our work is done.
Particularly on the politics or partisan issue.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, especially.
And maybe one of the things that we can do is, after we look at it, is come back and say, here's how we would change the charge for the next commission. to maybe avoid this kind of a problem.
Right. Well, I would definitely agree with that, because I think one of the things our report will have to grapple with is the fact that the language that's in the criteria is not practicable, if that's what we could prove.
I appreciate you using that term.
Thank you, you're welcome. And I agree, I want to look at it, and I want to see what we learn from it, and I'm, what am I wanting to say? I haven't made up my mind yet, but I think that I am understanding the argument better, that criteria applies only to process and not to outcomes of the maps themselves, if that's a fair reading of what's in the statute. We might be able to deal with it post hoc.
And Commissioner
Facer.
Oh,
sorry.
I was going to just quickly, well, you stepped out, the issue of cost did come up. And it's covered in our legal cost, and the cost is going to be quite modest. So, Matt. Yes.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I just wanted to maybe set the stage a little bit for further discussion on Monday, because I think as we as your legal counsel are looking at this, trying to advise, make sure we're following the statute, we've obviously identified that there's some tension here between what is required of us and a practical reality. And just in preparation for the meeting on Monday, I'd invite all the commissioners to look at our standard 6 that the commission adopted on the purposeful or undue favoring, because to us, that's really part of the reason, and just one small part of bringing in, these experts. It's more, hey, this is to help give credibility and demonstrate that the commission has adhered to the criteria that it has adopted. And this is just one of the many criteria that's been adopted. But it does pose unique problems in that it's at odds with potentially the other adopted standard of not looking at any political data. And so on Monday, I think it might be well to have a kind of a detailed conversation as to kind of how the committee or the commission is viewing this charge. We will certainly give you kind of our understanding of what the statutory language requires, but what it's requiring arguably, and the reason that we're even looking into this is the plain language says the commission will, to the extent practicable, prohibit the purposeful or undue favoring or disfavoring of an incumbent, political party, etc. And so this clause of undue favoring or disfavoring, for us to say, yeah, the commission has prohibited the undue favoring, really the key legal question is, well, what if that is inadvertent? That there's, as we've discussed, there's been no purposeful favoring or disfavoring throughout this entire process, but what if the end result results potentially in an undue favoring or disfavoring, however you want to interpret that as a commission? And that's where we're kind of struggling to see how best to advise you, because unlike the other criteria where we say, yeah, go back and fix this, that option's not necessarily available to say, hey, this one looks like it's an outlier with respect to unduly favoring or disfavoring a political party, but we like this map, let's try to fix it. But that's really kind of another part of that sticking point. And so I think we're all still working through this, and it's obviously a complicated issue, but I think in preparation for the meeting on Monday, it might be well for you to look at what that criteria is, and as a commission, when you interpret this, there is some flexibility within the statute as you've defined and interpret these things, that it really comes down to you to say, okay, this is how, we understand this language. Now, some language is obviously very clear as to what is required of the commission. And I think we've advised you with that. Here, I think it's it's subject to certain interpretations that I think are worthy of discussion on Monday about how best to address that, whether it's just from a process standpoint or whether, you know, we feel the commission feels that, well, if it turns out that one end result is, you know, such that we believe it's unduly favoring, you know, what are we going to do about it as a commission? But it's a difficult situation, which we all know. I'm saying the obvious, but I look forward to a conversation on Monday. But I think to help inform that conversation, having that information available, and I think Gordon and his staff has been wise to say, look, if we look at this, we're going to be very, you know, deliberate of making sure the commission feels comfortable before anything is disclosed, so as not to put the commission in a tight spot or a box, at least with respect to this standard 6. With respect to the other standards, I think what Moon and her team can do will be super beneficial. And I think just proving and demonstrating that these are really good maps, and if there's certain tweaks that can be made to make it even better, that you will then have the resources to do that. But this issue with respect to the purposeful or undue favoring is something that we're going to have to work through for the next few days. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So one of the things I'm hearing is it probably doesn't hurt to go in the report as long as you don't see it as maybe the final section we add after we've reviewed everything else. So it's just in the backside. So we think there's value in getting this information, particularly the stuff that you can see, and that's the splits and the compactness and those kinds of things, but keeping the political data until the commission fills or changes or gives us direction, we can keep that just for final element of the report.
Yeah, because we're going to have to assess what our legal obligations are under the statute.
So I think we'll, because of shortness of time, we as staff may end up with that information. And when I say staff, will be very limited staff that will actually see it. Probably just me and Cassidy. The rest will be able to be untainted as they work with you on that.
Commissioner Philly.
Thank you. This is probably a question that Matt could be thinking about over the weekend as well. One of the things, you know, as a lawyer, you don't ask a question unless you know what the answer is going to be. And so my question as I look at this is, assume for a minute that a map comes back, a House map comes back, and 37 of the House seats are clearly absolutely Republican dominated. The other 38 all lean Democratic. And somebody says, now wait a minute, there's only 30% Democrats. Why do they have the majority of the 38? The only choice you can have is just reject the map. I can't believe for a minute we'd have time to go back and redo that map to change any other things. That's why I've always felt that we have not gotten involved with political thing because of that very thing. And so, I mean, the result, what do? I guess the only solution we have is we just reject the map. If we feel like it is not politically viable, we just reject the map. And, you know, the interesting thing is all our stuff's public. Any legislator can go look at our work and say, I like that map, and go present it to the legislature.
No, I think you have a couple options. Like I said earlier, you may have gotten the criticism about a city split, but after you reviewed it, you didn't determine that it needed to stay there. So it's not that it was you rejected the map, you determined that the other criteria weighed heavier. So I don't want to create a problem where we haven't established one yet. And so I'm just, anyway, those are some thoughts. And we can talk about, excuse me, on Monday, we have a regular meeting, and this will be a topic of discussion. So of the whole project, not just this, but we're going to go through that.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
May I just ask you, do they still close the freeway at Clearfield at 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night? Because I want to be able to drive home.
We're going to have that for staff check on that. Yeah, to try to get you home decently. So the other thing too is on Monday, Cassidy reminded me, we want to narrow down to our 12 maps. We've got to have that. And so if we'll have the information from Moon on all the stuff that we just talked about, as well as Cassidy's. And so we're hoping to be able to get you to 12 maps. They can still modify and change to get public comments as you still change things all the way up to our last hearing. But it's really important as we start writing our narrative that we're down to our 12 maps. And this week we're meeting with the schools, all the school districts in Salt Lake County, Utah County, Davis County, and Weber County on the maps. And so we don't want to have, we want to be pretty precise in what we're making them do, as well as we're meeting with a number of county clerks this week. And so we need to really get to the brass tacks.
Please.
Gordon, I've had a very hard time, and we discussed this when we were trying to assess maps on the big screen in our big meeting room. Do we now have printout? Will we have by Monday printouts of every eligible map that we're going to be talking about? Good, because those are far easier to read and assess.
You'll have printouts of proposed maps.
Good.
Commissioner Hilliard.
As you mentioned, the education people, have you checked with the UVA? Do you have any maps they may have? We heard.
They have done a map, but we have not got it, so we're going to work to get that map.
I think they would be a group leader because they're going to have some very strong opinions and.
You found that in the legislature, is that
Yeah.
true? I want to know if this is personal or you're
They're
just
true.
guessing. No, you're right. And we want their, by the way, we do want their input.
Thank you. I think we've had a robust conversation this evening. Commissioner Baker.
On the second, what Gordon said about getting out the 12 maps. I know Commissioner Hilliard, Commissioner Thorne were working with Joey earlier today on some of the cleanup. You probably saw between 5 and 10% of the total cleanup that needs to occur.
Just in case you wonder.
It's an immense undertaking. If we don't get down to the 12 maps real quick, we're going to be in a very technical jar that's hermetically sealed and we cannot get out of it.
I can volunteer, Commissioner Thorne. Great to work with.
So I will second as strongly as I can from Gordon. The 12 maps no later than Monday. And that it may not be entirely our maps, it could be a citizen.
Sure.
Yep.
Well.
Agreed. Okay, I think with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So
Now, this